Welcome to St Andrew's Church on this Christmas weekend. Merry Christmas to you and all your loved ones. Unsurprisingly, we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 2, 1 to 20, the Christmas story. You might want to read that before listening to this talk, but I think you'll know most of the details as we go along. So have that bit of the Bible open. And this talk is called The Strange Idea of Christmas. Now, the first question I want to ask is, where does an idea like Christmas come from? Where does an idea like Christmas come from? I don't mean turkey or the tree or the lights or the gift giving or the things we do on the typical Christmas. I mean the idea, getting back to the original idea of Christmas, the idea of God coming to earth as a baby born to a poor teenager in suspicious circumstances. And whether you're religious or not, I think we can agree that this is an outrageous idea, a ridiculous idea, a ludicrous idea. And more so when we define the terms. If we go by what the biblical text tells us, then by God, I mean a divine source to everything that exists in the universe, the creator of everything. Think the biggest possible concept you can get your brain around. By coming to earth, I mean being born of a virgin. Yes, biologically impossible. How does that work? Get your head around that. And by baby, I mean the Son of God, or put another way, God in human flesh. Think the biggest cosmological concept you can imagine becoming the smallest, simplest common denominator you can imagine, a helpless, weak baby of low status. Yes, I know. Biologically, astronomically, cosmologically, rationally, impossible, implausible, improbable, whatever description, ludicrous, ridiculous, whatever you want to say about it. And it's far too easy, though, for us to say, okay, so where did that idea come from? Well, maybe it was myth, or legend, or fairy tale, the fanciful creation of a more primitive ancient culture, or indeed religious propaganda. But let's stop for a moment. What can we say for sure about this idea, or definitively about this idea? I think the first thing, and I'll give you three things, but the first thing we can say without a shadow of a doubt, that this is an idea that has motivated transmission. People from the very beginning have wanted to share this idea. And that's interesting, actually, because given that it is such a crazy idea, it would have sounded just as crazy back then in the first century, let me tell you. So much so that Joseph, Mary's husband-to-be, doesn't want to have anything to do with that idea. You know, hey, Joe, the angel Gabriel visited and told me that I was pregnant by the Holy Spirit, you know. He just decides to divorce her quietly. Now, Jesus is the central character of the biblical New Testament. And did you know that there is no other ancient document in the world that has been copied more times? Today we have sitting in our museums or scholarly archives 5,800 complete or fragmented Greek manuscripts, 10,000 Latin manuscripts, 9,300 manuscripts in various other ancient languages including Syriac, Slavic, Gothic, Ethiopic, Coptic, and Armenian. These copies were made by hand between 125 and AD and before the invention of the printing press. Most of them were made within the first 800 years of the Christian church. Copied by hand over and over again. Quite tedious, actually. And, you know, for some reason, people of multiple cultures and languages and religions were motivated to pass this idea on. People loved the idea exponentially, and in their joy, they couldn't help but share it. In 525 AD, an Eastern European monk named Dionysius Exiguus was so taken by the idea that he decided to stop time, would you believe it, at the birth of Jesus, and to start it again after his birth. And so we have BC and AD, and since then, millions of people across the world have just gone along with him, basing every chronological moment of their lives around this idea, the idea of his birth. It's the 24th of December, 2021 years after his birth. this is an idea that motivates transmission. Actually, Dionysius miscalculated by about 3 or 4 years, because Luke tells us that Jesus was born during just during a census, one of the first census taken at the time when Quirinius was governor, and scholars have actually calculated now that that's probably 4 BC. Not 0, but 4 BC. So he was out by about 3 or 4 years. But his passion for transmission was there, no doubt. And it wasn't just about written texts. The power of this idea and the passion, was transmitted through architecture, the beautiful cathedrals. And it meant, the passion that people had meant that they needed something more than just words on a page to communicate it. And so they developed music. And up until about the 9th century, music notation tended to be a little bit fragmented. You had the right language for melody, but you lacked the necessarily language to record rhythm. Okay. And the founder of what is now considered the standard music staff was a guy called Guido di Arezzo, an Italian Benedictine monk who lived from about 991 until after 1033 AD. And he invented what we now know as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And he taught his music staff using a hymn to St. John the Baptist, the guy who was the first to transmit this idea of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, coming into the world. And so we have this music notation. And 700 years later, George Friedrich Handel would discover this music notation, and he used it to express his creative gift, his genius. And during his career, he hit a patch where he was very short on money. Things weren't going particularly well. And so he decided that he would write an oratorio called The Messiah in 1741. It was really risky. There was many clergy who were horrified by the idea that you could actually sing the Bible in church. But he had no money, and he had to just go for it. And so he did, and he wrote the Messiah in 24 days with the help of a priest. And the first performance of Handel's Messiah was in Dublin in 1742 to a kind of mixed reception. And by 1744, kind of interest in it had kind of waned, and so Handel decided to take it off the schedule altogether. And he only decided to put it back on the schedule in 1749, full 5 years later. And he brought it back as a favour, or to do a fundraiser for the Foundling Hospital in London. And so they put this on. And it's an absolute resounding success. And here's the ironic twist of transmission. Whilst Handel wrote the Messiah to prop up his own failing fortunes, it only actually started to pay when it was used for the benefit of those less fortunate. The widow, the sick, the orphaned, and the poor. And that's because they were the ones who connected with this Messiah, because he was born in just such circumstances. 300 years later, a jazz musician called John Coltrane was very sick. He was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and he had just lost his job. And then he writes, "In the year of 1957, I experienced, by the grace of God, a spiritual awakening, which was to lead me to richer, fuller, more productive life." He would go on to write one of the greatest jazz compositions ever, and dedicate it to God, a love supreme. And the idea was retransmitted. This is an idea that motivated transmission and has done for 2,000 years. But second, you'd think an idea that has been copied and retransmitted so many times would evolve and change over the years, but it hasn't. Scholars say that Luke's Gospel was written around perhaps 80 or 90 AD, during the time of the Emperor Domitian. Today, if you ask the average person in the street about the Christmas story, most people will be able to say, Mary, Joseph, Bethlehem, shepherds, angels, wise men, and laugh if you suggested lobster, as in the film Love Actually. It's an idea that hasn't changed. Third, it's an idea that's gained a remarkable amount of global traction. This year, at least 2 billion people across the world will celebrate the birth of Jesus religiously. Countless more will celebrate it for better or worse, culturally, economically, creatively, with trees and food and lights and holidays and office dues and films and nativity plays and meeting loved ones, and countless more will be disappointed because they can't do all of those things because of COVID. So where does an idea like this come from? Remember the definition. God coming to earth as a baby born to a poor teenager in suspicious circumstances. Outrageous, biologically, astronomically, cosmologically, rationally, impossible, improbable, implausible. But an idea that is totally transmittable, unchanging, and gained an awful amount of global attraction. Simply a churchy agenda, political ideology, or a child's fairy tale. We'll stop for a moment and consider, why would we think like that? Because anything else would slow us down and force us to go back and look in uncomfortable places. You see, we come from a different place to the first century. A place saturated with ideas about faster, richer, sexier, brighter, leaner, softer, greener, fitter, cleaner, sweeter, juicier, tastier, bigger, better. A place where we are consumed by our drive for more and more, even as our planet chokes, our weak and poor stumble, and our best creations threaten to make us obsolete. Think AI. But if for a moment we avert our gaze and allow ourselves to be led astray, where are these uncomfortable places? Our story begins far, far away in a grubby manger in Bethlehem. And in this story, when God does finally choose to show up, he doesn't go to the palace, the temple, like any good political or religious ideology. He doesn't go to the cathedral or the mosque or the synagogue or the shrine or the church or the White House or the Kremlin or Buckingham Palace or the glitzy Hollywood office Christmas do. No. When God chooses to show up, he goes with the poor girl to the crummy stable. He goes there because there is no room for him in the normal places. And the first guests to witness his birth, by divine intervention or human accident, are not priests, popes, kings, queens, scientists, presidents, politicians, or celebrities, but a few terrified shepherds and some travelling foreigners. And it's only in this uncomfortable place that you learn, as many before you have, that this idea is a gift for you, but it doesn't belong to you, or your nation, or your religion, or your political persuasion, or your scientific method. It's meant to be shared by the whole world, and with the whole world, past, present, future. Transmittable, unchanging, and still beautifully relevant for today. So where does an idea like this come from? God coming to earth as a baby, born to a poor teenager in suspicious circumstances. What if the idea simply came from God? Is that not what you would expect from a unique, outrageous, biological, astronomical, cosmological intervention from God? By its very nature, it would seem implausible, improbable, impossible by human standards. Remember, you will only ever see the light if you stop in the place where you are and turn and go down to Bethlehem, down to the stable cave, and look down into the manger. Happy Christmas.